We have all heard at one point or another that the adventure game is dead, and while that may have been true at a certain point in history, it's not true now. Adventure games are still being made, and most importantly, they are still being sold, and some of them quite well. Now, they may be, some of them at least, watered down versions of the adventure games of yesteryear, but they are still adventure games. Light on the Moon Man logic puzzles, heavy on the story, often reliant on the illusion that you actually have some choice, that some of your actions do influence the narrative, but for the most part they are adventure games. And as how a couple of recent shows have proved, adventure games that rely a lot on Moon Man logic have not gone away either. They've actually ramped up that moon logic to ludicrous levels. But we're not here to talk about that now. We've already talked about puzzles being kind of last time. So instead, let's talk a bit about the bit of the adventure game that actually is dead. The text adventure. I know what you're saying, but I've seen stuff on Steam. They're just text with text options. How can we say that text adventure games are dead? Well, they kind of can be considered text adventure games because they're text and they're sort of adventure games, but they're not necessarily the kind of adventure games I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ones that use a text parser, the ones that use inventory, the ones that use, well, the same kind of style that you would see in Colossal Cave Adventure, which was a game released 41 years ago. It was made by a man named William Crowther, and then it was expanded upon by Don Woods. It was built on the PDP-10 mainframe. Oh, those PDP-10s. If you've never used one, well, you still can. There's not necessarily the same hardware around, but there are emulators of the mainframe, of the operating system, of the way that environment worked. And the way that environment worked was that people got together, they shared a mainframe, a single computer, and they would access it with several terminals. And then there they would do whatever they could. Write things, read things, do calculations, store data, read data, send data, and on occasion make video games. But this being a PDP-10, it had about the same processing power as, well, probably your mouse, actually less than your mouse, and yet you would still have trouble fitting it through a doorway. So you couldn't actually make games with a lot of graphics. Instead you would use text. A lot of text and ASCII characters, and you would make sometimes even graphical representations of things, but for the most part you would make video games based entirely on text. Video games like the aforementioned Colossal Cave Adventure. The game spread like wildfire right after it came out, and then it inspired a lot of other video games, more popular ones, for example, such as Zork. And from there the floodgates were opened and the genre of text adventures was truly born. Now, why weren't there text adventures before this? Wasn't there a market for them? Well, no, there literally was not a market for them because you would need, a keyboard to input things so that you could actually type in the text that was supposed to be parsed. And back in the 70s, the early 70s, mid 70s, there wasn't really much in the way of home computing. Sure, you had the Atari console and Pong and the Magnavox Odyssey and the other things, but there wasn't much typing involved there. This was before the Apple II, before the revolution, before the computer became a staple of the home. So that's why games like Zork and the Colossal Cave Adventure were made on university mainframes first and foremost. And as you know the story, they evolved year after year into more complex things. They've added graphics after a while. They became stuff like Mystery House. They became King's Quest. They became Sam and Max Hit the Road without Serious Sam, though that would still be awesome. And they eventually became the games we know and love today. The Monkey Islands, the Siberias, the Longest Journeys. and to its final extent, The Walking Dead's. It was a process of evolution that at a commercial level did kill the text-adventure game, but it did not kill the idea of it. Not at all. Because you see, there is one advantage that the text-adventure game has above all other games. There is just text in it, so making one is not difficult. Making one is the easiest thing possible. Making one is pretty dang near the easiest thing you could do. Even if you have no idea how to program, even if you have no idea how to build a parser, you can still make a game because there are parsers out there that will let you do just about anything with them. You have the tools to build whatever you want to. And what do people build? Well, there's been an evolution in the text adventure too. They're not called text adventure games. They haven't been called that for decades. They're called interactive fiction. They're more akin to playing a book. Some of them do still have puzzles, they do still have things to keep the player busy, but they're not reliant on that anymore. Mostly because of the time the genre actually spent with that component, with the puzzles. Every one of them was done. Every puzzle possible. Every maze-like contraption to navigate. Everything was already done by the time that graphical adventure games took over. So interactive fiction began to focus on, well, you know, the fiction part, the interaction part. And you may wonder, well, what's the point anyway? I mean, can we just make an interactive fiction game with graphics? That's easier to play. It's more appealing. Yeah, it is. Again, that's why the genre is dead commercially, but there is a subtle difference here. You can do things in text that you cannot do with visuals. You can call it a more of an intimate approach to things. You have a more direct line to the player when you're talking to them. You don't have to represent things in graphics form and hope they understand the setting, the backgrounds, the characters. You describe them, you emphasize what you need, what you want the player to understand. Or not. You can hide it. You can hide meanings, you can hide things until the player actually wants to further explore those aspects. You get a lot more control over the way that the game works. You even get to bend the laws of physics because, hey, it's just text, it doesn't matter. What, space-time? No, that's not a thing. And the player as well gets more control. Again, depending on how many verbs and words you use in the parser. If you let the player eat everything in their inventory, sure, that's a nice feature to have. They probably can't finish the game then, but hey, you give them the option, and it basically took you what, 10 minutes to do it? This being the part of interactive in the interactive fiction. As for the fiction part, you have the ability to tell a story here in a way that may seem a bit more similar to a book. And I say seem because it's not the same thing. A game can never be the same thing as a book. A game can never be the same as any other kind of medium because we do have the interactive component. We always have it. Without it, we're not games. We are something else. We are movies, we're books, we're leaflets, we are staring at the wall hoping that it will end soon. The presentation is similar to a book because it's all just text. But what you can do with that text, that's only limited by basically your imagination, by your ability, by your capacity to think up new ways to tell a story and to let the player interact with that story, with the characters you create, with the world you make. I know it may sound a bit corny that you can make anything is possible, but that's kind of the advantage of text adventure games, of interactive fiction. Now that may sound appealing to you, but remember, you're gonna be playing this by typing commands at your keyboard. Well, though some of them have evolved a bit, and there are parsers that will instead give you buttons instead of having to type everything. And I don't mean like the ones that you find on Steam, no, I mean something that's actually more complex. Not something that gives you 3 or 4 dialogue options or stuff, no, things that actually are more complicated. And I'm not talking about things made 40 years ago, no, they're still being made. Not commercially, but there are still interactive fiction games, there's still text adventure games being made because there are an awful lot of online competitions dedicated to them. Competitions that still have a lot of people participating because they do not require a lot of time invested in creating one. Just skill, the ability to be a storyteller in an interactive world. That makes interactive fiction a very useful tool for developing the ability to write, to tell a story, to create a narrative. So interactive fiction, text adventures, aren't really all that dead. They're just kind of like books a bit. They're there, they're everywhere. You can pick one up any day. You can even get Tale of Doom, but a lot of people don't. Maybe some people don't know they exist. Actually, quite a lot of people probably don't know these exist because, well, they're not what you would call marketable. Again, the commercial aspect is kind of done for. Also, they are not necessarily the best kind of application for the most dominant platforms today. While yes, you can play Colossal Cave on the phone, there's actually a port of it for phones. You kinda still wish you had a keyboard. But the basic idea is that text adventures are cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make a show and say text adventures are cool. It's fun to read. Unless you're playing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy one, where you sort of get the feeling that Douglas Adams really didn't like you for some reason. Though it's still a fun experience, I have to say. And it still has a better save game than the one with the gnarly lizard. Yes, I have seen the Steam comments. What of it? If you want to know more about text adventure games, you should really check out a documentary made about 7 years ago called Get Lamp. It's about 2 hours long, but it's probably gonna be some of the best 10 hours you've ever spent listening to someone talk about text adventure games. Or you can put this video on loop for about 8 times and you'll get it. Well, not as good of an effect, but similar. Goodbye.